Hello, folks. Another episode of Burning Platform, and a real honor to have Ray Lane back. Ray's been on the show for different topics. Today, we're going to talk about the Trump 2.0 economy. Crazy times. You're doing this on a day when the Dow Jones is down substantially, as it has been, it seemed like every day for the last couple of weeks. So, we're not going to only focus on tariffs and the market and so on. We're going to talk about a lot of different issues. And it's great to have Ray here because Ray has seen business from so many different perspectives. He was on the Oracle executive team. He's still on the Kleiner Perkins VC board. He was executive chairman at HP. He was at Booz Allen. Ray, you've seen the world in more ways than any other executive I know. So thank you for joining us. And kick it off by talking about first 100 days of Trump. What has excited you? What has concerned you? Let's start with that.
Well, first of all, thanks, Vinnie. It's a pleasure being here. Always enjoy talking to you about different subjects. It's always more fascinating to me than it is, I think, to the audience to have discussions with you.
You're also too modest, Ray.
Yeah, well, it's growing up in Pittsburgh. I think you kind of grew up in that kind of Midwest, culture. Yeah, your timing. You're right about timing. Your timing is impeccable to do this discussion 2 days or less than 48 hours after President Trump has announced tariffs, and so it's kind of like standing in the middle of a tornado or a hurricane and saying, "How's the weather?" In one perspective, it could be great tomorrow. A nice, after tornadoes, you get a nice sunny sky, and the weather is pretty good. But if you're standing in the middle of a tornado and your house is gone, it's a freaking disaster. And I think that's where everybody is right now. You either view it as longer term, and it's very hard for anybody in business or even consumers to look at the long term. We as Americans, I think, are too short term oriented. And so we naturally fall into what's going to happen in the markets. What is the daily news and how does that influence us? We look, maybe out a couple of days. What's happening with consumer prices? How does this affect my global supply chain in the quarter? How I've predicted a quarter to analysts, and now I got to go back and revise that quarter, and I don't have an opportunity to do that other than doing it in writing because I don't have an earnings call. It'd be interesting to see what happens in earnings calls that'll come up in the next few weeks. We're a little early for earnings calls, but certainly when we get to mid-April, we start getting into some earnings calls, and we're going to see obviously a lot of business perspective. I would not want to be a CFO or a CEO that's up first with an earnings call, especially if you have a global supply chain where you have components and hardware that are made in different countries that you have to try to calculate what that's going to do to pricing and how you have to price your products and deliver your products. So right now, I think it's really, really hard to sit back and provide, some perspective personally or for a business or even a global perspective. And if you're an economist, you have your certain opinions about how things work, demand and supply. And so most of the economists are predicting that these tariffs alone, that these tariffs will increase prices. There's no way that they will not increase prices. And in a finite market where customers of any industry have finite budgets that were set a couple of months ago, the only way that they have to go would be to reduce demand, is to buy less to fit into those budgets. So higher prices for products that'll fit into the same budget. That means decreasing demand and could lead to a recession. So that's kind of what I hear and what I discuss with economists. And economists have the luxury of not having to be right or wrong, right? They just simply put their finger in the air and say, here's what I see. But I think if you do step back from this and say, okay, let me take a little longer term perspective. And granted, I think that's hard to do. Personally, you watch your 401k, you watch your portfolio, you watch, it's hard to look beyond how am I going to end the day in the market. Or, as I said, business teams that have to figure out how they'll land the quarter, given even in public companies that they have predicted a certain way. But if you step back from this, you have to take these tariff moves. And I don't think we stay where we are. This is the first volley. I think it is, these are very large increases. But I think it will be negotiated by country, depending on other factors. So what kind of trade deficit and what kind of agreement will be worked out based on a lot of factors, in addition to just the products that are manufactured there. So there's other policies coming from Trump. So we have supposedly less regulation. I think we can count on that with the Trump administration because we saw that in Trump 1.0. And so we'll see less regulation, which should make it much easier to do business in the United States. We'll see, hopefully, sustained lower taxes. So hopefully the tax bill passes, these tax cuts become permanent, and in business we see, favorable lower business taxes that make it, again, easier to do business in the United States. And then we have, as you mentioned to me before we got on the call, a refinancing of a lot of our debt at more favorable rates. And so all of this, and then you take what Doge is doing, you take all these things and add them together, and you say, okay, am I going to have a friendly environment to do business in the United States? Will I have countries decide to maybe move some manufacturing operations into the United States? Will I see more investment? And that's what every country really fights for, is foreign investment dollars that come into your country. And so will we see more foreign investment dollars come into the United States? And to take the tariffs alone, it's hard to not conclude it's a bad idea. But if you take it in the context of all the things that I mentioned, then it may not be such a bad idea.
Ray, for a couple of weeks, I've been pushing back on people who were tariffs are a bad idea. I go, we're looking at trade policy from the 1920s, back when we didn't have sustained trade surpluses like we have now with Germany and China and so on. Okay, so don't give me data that is that old. Okay, and to your point, what 6 trillion in commitments have already been announced in 2 months by everybody from Taiwan Semiconductor to Hyundai to Honda to a lot of multinationals have made commitments, right? So we're looking at it very short term. We're looking at it from a Wall Street perspective.
Right.
I think there's a lot of neutral to positive stuff that it's just, he's got such an ambitious agenda, right? Just the tax bill should be a lot of positive, but we don't know.
I don't think we can ignore history, but I also don't think history is a precursor. Remember when the tech bust happened in 2000. Remember in 2008 when we had the global financial crisis. Remember when we had the pandemic. In all 3 cases, we had a lot of pundits mentioning 1929. This is we're going to have not just a recession. We're going to have a depression. We're just going to have, and I've heard stagflation. I've heard all sorts of predictions from this. And again, I think you have to step back. We are a much, much different economy, much different country than we were in 1929. the trade balances and the amount of trade and the size of our markets makes us much more resilient. And so you can take, 2,000 point hits on the Dow, and yeah, it trims off a lot of market cap and a lot of value, but this economy can take a much bigger hit than, and I think that's the bet here. And I'm not saying this will turn out the way Trump believes it'll turn out, but that is the bet. You got half the country, and I'm just being, just for the ease of conversation, half the country is kind of bought into Trump, said, I am for this guy, and he is working for the common worker, the people that bring more jobs to America. But I'm buying into all those programs: close the borders, smaller government, tariffs, all the things that Trump has basically said in the campaign. Voters have bought into. The other half of the voters haven't bought into it. Okay. And some of those will never buy into anything Trump says. But, you kind of have voters that hate Trump and hate anything that comes out of his mouth. You have voters that love Trump and love anything that comes out of his mouth. The most important voting segment are those voters that kind of say, there are really some smart things here that we've got to get away from the policies of the past, because we have high debt, we're losing manufacturing jobs, we're highly dependent security-wise on other countries. Our pharmaceuticals, our electronics are sitting outside this country. God forbid a war doesn't come, so we would be screwed. So basically you say, okay, well, I am for closing the borders. This is the third segment I'm talking about of voters. I am for closing the borders. I am for a smaller government, but these tariffs make no sense. And so that third, or whatever it is, 40% of the voter population that run a lot of our business today kind of need time to sort out what this all means. Okay, because the other 2/3 are not going to change their position. AOC and
Bernie.
And all that. It doesn't matter if Trump wants to hand everybody $1 million tomorrow and say, I'll write you a check for $1 million, and say it's a bad idea. Okay, so I think we've got to depend on the ones that are kind of parsing this and are not Trump lovers or Trump haters, but they're looking at the policies. And then are the policies, as I look at each of those, do I look at it as a part of a puzzle?
Yeah.
So do I look at, have we lost the picture?
No, you're fine.
Okay, because somebody's calling me and I lost the picture. Let me just decline it and see. Okay, I'm back. Okay, sorry about that.
That's all right.
But in that segment that I'm talking about, that is not a Trump lover or Trump hater, then they have to look at it. Are they going to look at it longer term? And are the tariffs a piece of a very important puzzle that includes tax reductions, that includes regulatory reductions, government reduction? Or are they looking at it alone, saying these tariffs are a stupid move because it destroys my business?
Powell, the Fed chief, was today. He did a press conference interview, and I thought he was really, really level-headed, kind of balanced. Like we gotta see it's 2 days. It's too short. He was pretty balanced about it. And to your point, it's like there's so much information to absorb here. Can't just jump in and say everything is bad, right? So
yeah. So I think in terms of people listening in, and you say, okay, I'm interested in hearing what the two of us have to say about this, just to kind of formulate their own opinion. I would advise stepping back and say, okay, tariffs alone may or may not be a good idea. I personally think they are not a great idea, especially at the size of the tariffs that have been announced. And I don't think they'll end up there. I think they will be negotiating with each country. I mean, this is actually short term. If I was really being short term oriented, say, okay, I'm gonna act based on what I've seen in the last 2 days, I would move all of my manufacturing to Mexico. So all the tariffs on the components, that come out of China or Taiwan or Philippines or whatever, get wiped away if you add value by shipping them to Mexico and finishing the product there because of the MCA exception. And so short term, I say, okay, I don't care because I'm going to just basically try to, add value in Mexico and ship the products here. If I manufacture the products in the United States by taking all those components from China and Taiwan directly, I'm going to end up with a 30, 40% tariff on them. So it actually works exactly the opposite of the way Trump thinks it'll work. So I don't see us staying where we are today. I see Trump negotiating with every country on how this will work and let it settle out. And then you have to hear it. And I hope there's a lot of education from the Trump administration about how does this work with tax reductions and regulation reduction.
Yep. Well, the question is, you don't want him changing his mind every other day, though. So, like you say, it'd probably be a country by country negotiation. I would say, if I was advising him, I would say focus on China, Germany, 5 countries. Okay, don't bring in Vietnam. But he's brought in a lot of distractions with these, having specific tariffs by country, and everybody's whining, "Hey, you're unfair to us." Well, blah blah blah, right? It's just noise. So,
Well,
um,
what we don't want to have happen, okay? So I really review the tariffs and the taxes and the regulation as each as tactical moves as part of a grand plan. Okay, so the bet here is that each of these will lead to greater investment in the United States, more jobs in the United States, more companies doing things in the United States, and it helps the U.S. It helps America. But if the viewpoint is that all of these things that Trump is doing are hurting me as a country, then I may align with new friends. And so if a new world order emerges from this to say,
hey,
if I'm China, I go to Europe and say, hey, this brings us closer together. And he doesn't want to drive that new world order around China, which is the biggest issue.
The pushback to that, Ray, is he believes, and I think he's right, we are the biggest consumer economy in the world, right? So these countries need us. Okay, China definitely needs us. I mean, Germany cannot afford to lose such a big, consuming market. So, his long-term vision of come and make here is reasonable. I think the overcoming the short-term tariffs issue, how he balances that is going to be critical.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's very distracting at this point. We've been talking about countries, but not, Ray, you and I have traveled the world quite a bit, right? It just seems like we're entering a whole new Cold War, a whole new world order, it seems like, right? We've got a hostile Canada, at least short term, a hostile EU. On the other hand, we may have a friendlier Russia and Middle East, right? You've got um, if you listen to Trump, he's been reading a lot of White House library books. He's become a big fan of McKinley and President Polk, right? Both of which were fairly expansionists, at least in our 1800s version of expansionists. I mean, but the statements he's making about Greenland and Panama and so on suggest that he wants to, the manifest destiny, revive that, right? He's told Elon, Mars is part of a manifest destiny. So He just seemed like a very, very ambitious president. So, from a global perspective, what are you reading?
Yeah, I personally don't think he is an expansionist. I think he is an America first. That's what he was elected on. That's what he believes. I think if you look 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I mean, he was talking back then about what's good for America and what's not good for America. Okay. The same way Ross Perot did,
Right.
standing against the NAFTA deal back when he was running for president. What's good for America? What's not good for America? And that's full stop. That's where he starts and that's where he ends. So the discussion about Greenland and Panama is strictly what's good for America. I think the person on the street didn't know anything about, okay, why Greenland? I mean, what's it? No, we don't think anything about Greenland. So why is he bringing up Greenland, or why is he bringing up Panama? Everybody thinks the Panama Canal is like, why is that an issue? Well, he's bringing it up because it is an issue, because China has been abusing, you know, their power in Panama. So he's bringing it up purely as a what's good for America. I don't think this is let's grab more territory, let's bolster. And I think the Canada and Mexico, as I just said, Mexico right now has to be, they can make a lot out of these tariffs. Mexico, this could be make Mexico great again, more than America great again. And Canada, it just doesn't matter. Canada will continue to be friends of the United States. They have to be. And again, we'll work out the tariffs in the context of larger policies, and it will end up being negotiated in some manner. I don't think it's.
I mean, you didn't mention the EU. They seem awfully hostile in a lot of
Well,
ways.
I think Trump has, again, in the spirit of what's good for America, a lot of things that go in that bucket happen to influence the EU. So whether it's NATO and who pays their fair share in NATO, so what happened after World War II is Europe got rebuilt largely on American dollars. And, so we still have a structure that is highly dependent on that. Well, those countries have independent economies now that are actually pretty good. And the EU combined has an economy that's almost the size of the United States. And so why can't they stand on their own? Why are they still, living off of policies that were created after World War II when they were highly weakened?
And you and I both agree on that, right? But a lot of people use that negative vibe from Europe and others. It's just more Trump hate. It just seems like he's created a lot of hostility towards himself, his persona.
Yeah, yeah.
Not deserved. I mean, I don't think it's deserved, but it is what it is.
Well, I think everybody has that feeling, right? So you look over the last 8 years as we've gotten to know Trump, even the most staunch Republicans say, this is not a guy I go play golf with. This is a guy I don't party with. He's not, it's not the personality I hang with. But I've worked with a lot of people that I feel I respect their leadership. Whether it's Ross Perot or Larry Ellison, I respect their leadership. And I always told people, you don't get half a package. You don't get his brilliance, his leadership, his technology skills without getting some things you don't like. And so you have to kind of buy into the Trump package and say, okay, I'm just going to ignore the personality side of it and the way he does things in such a blustery manner. And just, you sometimes have to figure out the policy from tweets that he puts out on true media. And so that's just not the way we're used to seeing our government operate. But he's running it like he's running one of his businesses. And the question is, does he break it short term before he fixes it long term?
Yeah, you've been part of many dream teams, right? I mentioned Kleiner, Oracle, HP, and so on. I mean, one thing fascinating about this cabinet is how many young people he has, right? And how many CEOs he has, Doug Burgum and Lutnick and Besant and so on. I mean, this is a very strong team. At least I think it's a strong team. How do you manage such a strong team, though? I mean, it just must be the egos there must be just unbelievable.
Actually, I don't think so. I think, first of all, they have to fit into, they've never kind of worked for somebody like Trump. Okay, so they may have strong opinions about how to do something, and now Trump says, no, I want you to go the other way. They're going to have to deal with that. But anytime a business person, I've had a couple of opportunities to go into government, and I said no to those opportunities because I just don't think I would work well in a system that kind of moves slowly, kind of puts you into binders, has civil servants as employees, and you can't really. It's like being the president of a university. You got tenured faculty. You can't deal with it. So I think that situation will exist, but I think Trump is a master delegator. I think he better than anybody, I think, doesn't really get involved in the detail, but he understands the detail. And so I think he expects these young people to execute and to, hold on a second, I got a call coming in again, at least kill that. Okay. But he expects these people to execute on a broad-based strategy. The question is, if they disagree with that strategy or disagree with the direction he's taken, they need to get out. You cannot work in a Trump administration where you're disagreeing with him. You got to buy into the program. Now, you can influence him. You can convince him of something to say, hey, you're going the wrong direction because, and have great, rationale for that. But if you're going to sit and disagree with the direction that a strong personality like Trump is going in, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So, but I agree with you. I think it is a great cabinet. It is a young cabinet that doesn't have a lot of baggage from politics of past. That's a good thing and a bad thing, in that they don't really look at Elon Musk. Okay, he doesn't really understand, quote, how government operates. Well, that's his superpower. He doesn't understand it and he doesn't care. Okay. It's just that he believes that America will go bankrupt if we do not bring the debt down. We do not bring the cost down. We are bloated, and I don't know how anybody can disagree with that. The disagreement comes from how fast it's going and what they believe, will get withdrawn. Okay. So does Social Security get touched? Does Medicare get touched? Do services for veterans get touched? And that's not Trump's intention. We have the government employment. In fact, in California government is the largest employer in California by far. We have the highest taxes in the country. We have the worst schools and the worst roads. So that is kind of like what Trump sees as the country. We have a lot of money going into the government. We're not getting any value for it. And so the American citizen, the American consumer, and the American taxpayer can get a better deal for what they're paying. And I, for one, don't mind paying higher taxes if you get value for it. But what frustrates me is paying higher taxes and getting less value.
Ray, I've had a couple of conversations with folks about Elon. They're like, this guy doesn't know anything about what he's doing. And I go, that's exactly why he's, like you say, it's a superpower, right? He is not going to be stopped by career bureaucrats who have budgets to protect and so on, right? He is willing to look at data. I mean, and, I was at his SpaceX Boca Chica facility in Texas. Okay. And in a presentation they presented, they said, the cost of taking in a craft or a human being to orbit is now 1/100th what it was
Yeah.
when NASA was running the space shuttle. And I go,
Right.
whoa, right?
Right.
And he did that at Twitter, right? He basically slashed 70, 80%, and company didn't go bankrupt overnight. So,
Right.
people will
Right.
say he doesn't know what he's doing. And I go, no, I don't think you're giving him enough credit. He may not know
Right.
exactly what the line item is and, you know, in the coding block for Social Security versus the EPA, but the guy is pretty shabby.
Yeah. And again, it's the short term versus a longer term perspective. We've had the opportunity now. NASA was their most shining days were in the 1960s, right? I was lucky enough to be of age in the 60s, and I mean I couldn't get enough of watching us in 1969 land on the moon. I mean, I took a week off work. Actually, I was in the Army at the time, so I took a week off of leave and sat in my living room. I put it on a TAC, tape to tape, just it recorded the whole thing. Couldn't get enough of it. Didn't matter how much we were spending to get on the moon. That was a mission. Okay. Now it does. Private companies can go to the moon and back easily. They know how to do it. So now cost is the issue. If you want to put satellites in space or put, people in space, you can't charge everybody $1 million to put a satellite into space. And I think he has proven with Tesla, with SpaceX, that it can be done. But after 2 months, 3 months, we're willing to say he doesn't know what he's doing. It's crazy. It's crazy. He does know what he's doing. And now he may not be a buttoned up process guy that makes sure that everybody, how most companies work. It's a committee of 18 people that make decisions, and we make sure that everybody's okay with the decision and that everything is checked. Yeah, there's not all the T's are not crossed and all the I's are not dotted. He'll be the first one to admit that. But he's trying to set us on a direction of lower cost, less government, and I think it is absolutely necessary.
Well, let's since you and I spend our lives in technology, let's talk about technology and the Trump 2.0 economy. Um, clearly, when it comes to blockchain, when it comes to crypto and so on, for whatever reason, he's showing interest. Um, with Elon Musk, maybe Mars is on the agenda. What 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 would you like to see from Trump when it comes to STEM disciplines, technology, but also broadly STEM?
Well, you and I have lived it, as you said. We've become, at least I am, a huge believer that investments in technology, first of all, starting with basic science. So I've been really disappointed to see the U.S. government put less and less money into ARPA and DARPA. So we are not what we were in the 60s and 70s, where the U.S. was putting a massive amount of dollars that would end up in research in universities that would lead to technology that may help the government in some way with a weapon, with space travel, whatever it is. But all of that technology on the way to getting to those programs benefited the commercial world. And so that technology development was very important as it went from research to development to commercial application. I think we've stopped doing that. We are not the leader from a government standpoint in putting research dollars in to see where it takes us. With no goal in mind other than let's see where this takes us and keep pushing the envelope on technology. So I think we have to continue to do that. Trump needs to double down on technology. There is a bit of a, this is really important. There's a bit of a dichotomy in the Trump administration now. You kind of see it kind of between Trump's view on America first. So if you just say, that is Trump. If I had one thing to say about Trump, it's America first. And that means he's going to invest as much as he can in American technology so that we are first in the world in developing these new technologies, quantum, robotics, AI, all of these things we need to be number one on. Okay. And on the other hand, you have the Vance camp, which is about consumer protection, about antitrust, about don't let big tech get bigger. And so there is actually a battle going on inside about, okay, what should we do? Do we allow, because Meta, Amazon, NVIDIA, these are powerhouses that are winner-take-all markets, and they're getting bigger and bigger, and the EU is basically taking a position, stop them. Stop them. This is not good for anybody if they continue to get big. Well, if you do that in all technology, that's really a dumb move for America, because all it does is help Chinese companies get bigger and take a bigger position in the world. So we have to invest in American technology, American research, and we need to make sure that the big technology companies aren't doing any harm. So build fences if we can, but applaud their position in the world. Okay, imagine if Google and Meta and NVIDIA were French companies. Imagine if they were all French companies, and we'd be sitting here saying, how do we do that? Okay, we are the envy of the world because of our technology industry. This administration must support our technology and not let Huawei or let Tencent or let ByteDance or let any of this, because I tell you, the technology is coming up in China. Where do you think these NVIDIA chips and servers are going? 30% are going to China. They're finding their way into China through Singapore and other places, but they're going to China. So they're not that far behind.
So you mentioned JD. I heard JD mention shipbuilding might be coming back to the US. Do you see that as a way to get, commercial results from government spending? Same thing with the F-47, right? The new sixth generation fighter plane. Does that have any impact on commercial innovation, or is it too long a cycle?
I think it all matters. I mean, shipbuilding in the United States, obviously for commercial and military purposes, is really important. We need that skill, but I'd say that for most industries, we need any industry that carries with it heavy IP. We need to be investing in, protecting, and saying it belongs in America. Belongs in America. But we should not, until it makes sense, until there's harm being done, real harm being done, but support, big tech has become a bad name. It was a bad name in the Biden administration. It could become a bad name in the Trump administration. And so we need to protect our big tech. It is the one big advantage we have in the world right now.
So to make sure the Max 7 continues to dominate the Wall Street. That's one way to continue what's been going on. What else, Ray? What else positive are you seeing from Trump? Because in the last couple of days, it's very easy to be tough on the guy.
Yeah, it is, and I'm a Trump fan. It's not so much Trump the personality; it's Trump the policies. And so I, for one, have kind of are in that camp that have bought into the direction we're taking. I've already said I'm not in favor of the tariffs at the size that he's done them. Small tariffs, maybe country by country, small tariffs to just kind of bring each party to the table, but not this sweeping large tariffs. And I don't think that's where it'll end up. But I buy into the program of less regulation, lower taxes, and grow demand. Okay. look, we could end up with a recession out of what's happening right now. I think the chances are certainly higher. And there's two ways to bring prices down and get the economy growing. And that is do it slowly, like we've been trying to do it with interest rates, or crash it.
Soft landing.
If you crash it, the prices will come down. So there's two ways to do it, but I think it's hard to be a traditionalist with this administration. Like, okay, I believe that government should just keep on going, which means we will approve a higher debt ceiling every year. Um, we'll have a continuing resolution every October, never balance a budget. Globalization continues to favor China, favor Korea, favor those countries. By the way, we started this globalization trip based on lower labor costs. Okay, that's primarily, let's go to the spot in the world where we have lowest labor costs and we pay $1 for something that in the United States would cost us $15. At least in the technology business today, capital is much more important than labor. So you can assemble a server without a lot of human involvement. And so you should be able to build in the United States a full stack server in the technology business for pretty much near the cost that you can by using this global supply chain. So I think you got to, kind of give up.
That's an argument the Europeans use. Your labor is horrible. You don't have labor. And I go, why do you need that much labor? Modern
Yeah,
manufacturing is much more robotics and AI
right,
and
right,
sensors and so on, right? Like the Amazon distribution warehouse.
right. Yeah.
Um,
So I think I maybe I'd leave you with two thoughts. One, let's step back and allow the full policy to take effect. Make the tax cuts permanent, bring taxes down for businesses, negotiate with each of the countries the real quid pro quo tariffs that need to be in place, not what they are now, is it's kind of peanut butter out there. Lower regulation, get more investments, as you say, 6 trillion, let's get it to 20 trillion investment in the United States. And then let's see where this goes. Hopefully avoid a recession, get this thing sorted out as much. And again, it's not business as usual. Don't let the debt continue to grow. Don't, fail to do budgets. Don't, leave the government as big as it is. Don't be thinking short term. So you can't be a traditionalist and be happy with Trump. You have to say break some glass, and hopefully you don't destroy the kitchen while you're breaking the glass. The other thing is the danger. Where is the danger in what's going on right now? And that is if this creates a new world order with China essentially getting our friends to be their friends. So if France and Germany and Canada, Mexico, and other important countries kind of say, you know what, I've had it. This is not the way we've got to develop trade agreements, and China takes advantage of that, and it creates a new world order. Like we grew up in the Cold War era, and if this creates a new world order of trade, that's not good. I can't imagine Trump would let that happen, but
More than that, I can't imagine Europe will fall for that. I mean, if you go see the Belt and Road Initiative that China has had in Asia and Africa and so on, I mean, they, they benefit the most from it. I mean, the countries they go in to help are usually starving by the end, by the time China leaves. I mean, everything, all the equipment comes from China, all the labor comes
right.
from China, right? So why does Germany think they're going to be able to penetrate the Chinese market? It's going to be the other way around, right?
Yeah.
So
So I would like to see a little moderation in the America first. I mean, a hardcore America first creates sovereignty and sovereignty and turf warfare. And I don't think that's where the United States needs to be, is in turf warfare with all our friends. Canada, for instance. We don't need that. It's not important. I think if we have negotiated economic agreements with all of our important countries, take the top 10. I think you're right about forget about all the others. Take the top 10, get negotiated agreements that both are happy with and both feel like are going to be economically beneficial. Then I think that's where Trump is going. I think that's where he's going. Get the top 10 in the right place, and both of us are happy with the agreement. I know he believes getting there has to be a kind of negotiated way of getting there. You play hardball at the beginning, and then it feels better as you sit down at the table.
Hey, always a pleasure, and you're always full of mind-opening thoughts. So,
Good. Hopefully, it's not just BS.
no, no, but
I don't know. It's like
Ray, it is so nice to listen to people who are balanced about this. There are so many. I mean, Trump is such a you know firebrand.
yeah, you're right. You're right.
That it is a pleasure to logically talk to people, right? So, especially business people. There are way too many politicians and frankly, U.S. haters. So,
Yeah, yeah.
all
Well,
right, sir.
think we got to pick our eyes up a little bit further down the horizon and see what's coming. And this is only, as you say, the first 100 days. And if we had had that viewpoint on the first 100 days about President Bush, you know, we wouldn't have our eyes on 9/11, right? We'd be, and 9/11 changed his administration totally.
Good point. All right, Ray. Thank you.
Okay,
Appreciate you taking the
great to
time.
see you, Vinnie. Thank you. All right, bye.